Chris Bumstead just showed everybody what bodybuilding should be about with his physique at the Prague Pro on the open stage. However, let's not forget that we already have these kinds of physiques in the open division. I'll make it clear immediately what I mean by these kinds of physiques, but before that, in this video we're going to compare the Prague Pro C-Bum to Andrew Jacked, and I chose Andrew's best shape to date from the 2024 Texas Pro. When I say these kinds of physiques, I mean aesthetic, balanced, conditioned, but muscular at the same time. In simpler terms, I'd categorize them as aesthetic mass monsters. Yes, C-Bum does not look like a mass monster yet, but that's what everybody wants from him now, to fully develop an open physique and do the Mr. Olympia. Until then, let's compare Andrew Jacked and Chris Bumstead, who arguably have the most beautiful physiques in the world right now, together with Mr. Olympia Samson Dauda. Front double biceps. Even though I categorize these two physiques under the same umbrella, they're very complementary. It's true that Andrew Jacked is a seasoned open competitor, but by their looks, Andrew has the more bubbly look with rounder muscle bellies, while Chris has that polished, dry look with clear lines. Not entirely the same thing, but if you want, Andrew is more like a Ronnie and Chris is more like a Dorian, but this analogy should be taken with a grain of salt. Anyway, when I see this, I remember how good Andrew was in Texas. It's such a pity he couldn't replicate this look at the Olympia, as he shouldn't have placed lower than second if he looked like this. But I digress. Both have great silhouettes, but C-Bum has the tighter midsection and a vacuum, while Andrew has very aesthetic abs. Andrew has fuller yet less detailed arms. The same could be said about the lower bodies as well. If Chris Bumstead ever does the Olympia, this is the call out I would pay to see, with the condition that both be on. As far as they look here, Andrew is too big and round for Chris, so 1 point for the Mona Lisa. Now, this is a pose I want to see next to each other on stage, the front lat spread. Everyone is talking about the fact that Chris has the best front lat spread in the world, but they all forget about Andrew Jacked. Now, I'm not entirely sure about the scaling here. They should be roughly the same height, but C-Bum has the longer neck and more vertical head, so this is how I figure they should be scaled. However, as they look here, I don't see how Chris can actually beat Andrew. It's also true that Andrew's footage is of better quality, but just by looking at their frames, I believe the Mona Lisa of bodybuilding is still superior. Andrew has the wider structure, the better flaring lats, and I like his chest and midsection more as well. Of course, we should consider that C-Bum would look much fuller as a seasoned open competitor, but nonetheless, I don't think he could beat this look of Andrew. He could rival it, but not entirely sure. As usual, we give this pose to C-Bum by default. What do you guys think about this pose? Side chest pose. From the side, the difference in categories is not noticeable here because C-Bum is still a classic physique, let's admit. However, from the side, Andrew does not have the thickness necessary and gets pushed by C-Bum here. Aside from the chest fullness, C-Bum almost looks bigger and heavier than Andrew from the side. C-Bum also has better details and striations, both in the upper body and especially in the lower body, and their executions make it clear that Chris Bumstead wins this pose decisively. Back double biceps. Chris Bumstead does battle here. He struggled the most against Samson from the back in my earlier matchup, but against Andrew, Chris is holding his own. He needs a little more thickness through the back and he's ready to take on Andrew Jacked in the back double biceps. Andrew has the width and depth but lacks the details and separation of Chris Bumstead, especially in the lower half of the back. If we factor in the lower body, Chris Bumstead actually has the upper hand here. Remember that Andrew's footage is of much better quality than Chris's? This would be a clearer photo for C-Bum that pretty much makes it look like this pose could go either way. It's difficult because in the upper body I still think C-Bum needs more size, but whoever is winning this pose is not winning it convincingly, so it wouldn't decide the victor of the comparison overall. If you are enjoying my content, consider subscribing. A big portion of you, around 73%, are not subscribed, and it would mean a lot to me to reach that 30k subs milestone by the end of this year. I appreciate it, guys. In the back lat spread, it becomes even clearer that Andrew has the mass advantage over C-Bum. This is Andrew's stronger back pose, especially at the Texas Pro, where I thought he looked better than Samson ever did before the 2024 Mr. Olympia, so yes, Chris can't do much about it. When it comes to the lats, and especially in the lower half, Chris looks legit, but through the middle of the back, the traps. Andrew jacked looks too big and thick for C-Bum here, in my opinion. Now, Chris retains his overall advantage in the lower body, but the pose as a whole goes to Andrew jacked, in my opinion. The side triceps is arguably Andrew's weaker pose, mostly because of his inability to hit it right. On the other side, we're not used to seeing Chris hit this pose, as it's not a mandatory in classic, but I gotta say he looks pretty legit in this pose. He has the flow, the chest, the tight waist, the clearly separated triceps muscle, and the superior side leg. Now both of them would need a little more thickness in this pose, and by how they look here, I would give the pose to Chris Bumstead overall. Abs and thighs. This is again a beautiful sight to see. Two beautiful ways to hit this pose. I'm talking about Andrew's abs versus Chris's vacuum. If we actually take into consideration what the judges said regarding the vacuum, that it is valid for the abs and thighs pose, and if this pose would come down to who looks better, it would be difficult to choose between Andrew and Chris. Personally, I think you should show the abs in the abs and thighs because this is not the vacuum in thighs, but I digress. Regardless of this, Andrew is still too big for Chris from the front. We've seen that from the side Chris is better, and from the back they split the poses more or less. From the front, Andrew remains a powerhouse. Too powerful even for Chris Bumstead, at least for this between classic and open version of C-Bum. The abs and thighs go to Andrew jacked. Now there is a front pose where Andrew is not very strong, the most muscular, because in this pose you need thick shoulders and arms, including triceps, forearms, and preferably a long-headed biceps. Andrew finds himself on the other side of the spectrum when it comes to all these. Maybe the same thing could be said about Chris, but Chris has the details and the polish through the guns. Andrew looks soft overall in this pose and loses the fullness advantage because of the aforementioned reasons, while C-Bum compensates with more polish. I'm not entirely sure about the hands clasped, but this crab variation of C-Bum beats anything I've ever seen from Andrew jacked in this pose. It may be a stretch, but I'm giving the most muscular to Chris Bumstead. So when we draw the line, this comparison results in a 4-4 tie on poses, with Andrew winning his usual 3 front poses, the front double, the front lat spread, and the abs and thighs, which, by the way, are very strong poses for C-Bum too, and also the back lat spread, at least from the back poses. C-Bum wins both side poses, the most muscular, and he could also have a chance in the back double biceps. Now, in the end, I do think that Andrew's overall superior mass and fullness would win him this matchup, considering this is still a hybrid open version for C-Bum, not a fully developed one yet. Also considering how everybody, including the judges, considered the Texas version of Andrew worthy of the Mr. Olympia title, says everything you need to know without saying anything else.